everyone, and welcome to our latest Insurtech Insights webinar. It's our second one of this week and our global webinar. So we'll be looking all across the world at a pretty broad topic, as pretty much as broad a topic as we can do, as we talk about which insurers will thrive beyond 2022. Obviously, that's the positive spin. As we were just talking about in the speakers room now, though, that means there may be some who don't thrive quite as much. But that's not something that I can tackle alone. Have to do this very much with the help of some brilliant panelists who I'll introduce in just a second. Before we do, though, I think for anyone who hasn't logged into one of these webinars before, a couple of technical housekeeping points. The first of which is you'll be able to see that there's a live chat section. We'd love to hear from you. Obviously, we can't be in the room with you today, but please comment where you're tuning in from. We know we have a very global audience, especially on these Wednesday webinars. And also, you'll notice the Q&A section. So we'll be addressing as many questions as we can in the final 10 to 15 minutes of the event. So please be putting your Q&A questions in. We love to hear from you. It gives us such a broader range of questioning than we can come up with by ourselves. I think without any further delay, we'll get on to introducing our speakers today. Rob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Matt. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today on this fantastic webinar. Looking forward to a terrific discussion. My name is Rob Galbraith. I've spent over 25 years in the insurance industry, primarily working on the property and casualty side, primarily in underwriting and leading innovation teams. So kind of working for traditional incumbents and trying to have them pave the way for the future. Certainly, we know that there's a lot of new insurtech startups that are coming up as well. So we can talk a little bit about some of the challenges and the possibilities to connect with them. I also am the author of the best-selling book, The End of Insurance as We Know It, which came out in 2019. And thankfully, I hear from folks today that it's still as relevant as ever in this post-pandemic world that we live in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rob. Vaughn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the chief cook and bottle washer at HighGear. I do whatever anybody else hasn't been employed yet to do. I helped found the company close to 20 years ago as a fledgling spinoff from a tech company. I've got about 30 years in technology and digital transformation and about 20 years of it focused on process improvement. We've got clients around the world, many in the Fortune 500, a significant presence in energy, financial services, specifically in energy, insurance and in government. So while we don't focus specifically on insurance, we do have a pretty good concentration in there. And it's been one of the interesting areas to me where I both see some folks advancing and accelerating in significant ways and other folks sort of having to be forced into that by the rapid changes in the competitive marketplace. And so I'm very interested in participating in today's talk.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Vaughn. And Carey Anne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me today. My name is Carey Anne Nadeau. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Loop, which you may or may not have heard of, but hopefully you've heard of. We're a new insurance company that sells private passenger automobile insurance and is really rethinking the way that auto insurance is underwritten. We've removed things like credit score, occupation, and education to make insurance much more fair and accurately priced for more people. And we're really super active in building community and relationships with our customers and platforms like Discord and Instagram, and even TikTok. So I'm hoping to connect with a lot of folks today and share our vision for what the future of insurance looks like.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think you are far trendier than we are. We have not even touched Discord. I don't even know what Discord really is. And we certainly haven't touched TikTok yet. But yeah, I mean, as you've all heard, a really great range of panelists from very different parts of the industry who I think can give some really fantastic perspectives on the main topic for today. But I think without any further delay, let's get straight on to our first main topic area, which is what can major insurers learn from insurtechs? Vaughn, what would you say are the big learnings that insurers can start to make from these emerging insurtechs?
They need to go faster. I left a moment of silence there on purpose because I really want to let that sink in. They've got to be able to go faster. The insurtechs are showing them that they can go from the inception of a risk to the binding of a policy and they can get a significant portion of those to happen without human interaction. And what the insurtechs, I think, are doing that the traditional carriers are struggling with is they're hiring great people to manage exceptions, and they're hiring great people to build the technology to reduce the number of exceptions. And so, so when you can get straight line processing and give someone an answer for the thing that they're inquiring to you about extremely quickly, that's what people are looking for. But I really appreciate the talk of using Discord and other technologies to reach out with people. Just being able to text message someone and get an answer is sort of what people are looking for. But really what's underlying that is they want to be, whether they're talking through Discord or text messaging or email or even through a phone call, they want to have somebody at the other end that can hear what their problem is and resolve it extremely quickly. And that actually requires that there's a systemic thinking. It's not just the old way of we're just going to add more bodies for a volume of call, but what are the kinds of exceptions we deal with, and how do we empower the people who are going to get informed about those exceptions with the power to make changes, to resolve the customer's issue, and to resolve the customer's issue in extremely short time. That means they've got to have rapid access to the information necessary to make decisions. That there's got to be a standard way that things flow through so that you can reach into the stream and grab that one that's got an exception quickly and gather all the necessary data. And so I think it really is becoming a data play as well. It's about how quickly you can give your team access to the critical information they need, how well organized it is, how they can sort, search, and prioritize things. And, I'm biased. We live in the world where we help people organize massive amounts of work and turn it into things that you can grab the bits of information that you want very quickly. You can enforce the capture and display of the right bits of information as something moves through. But the purpose for all those things, regardless of whether somebody's using our tool, our platform, or whether they're building something from scratch, or whether they're cobbling together a handful of tools, it's that person who deals with the exception, that's the moment of real experience. The default, the baseline, what people expect right now is that I can say I'm interested in something and that you can tell me what it would cost from you, and I can engage you extremely quickly. But the real moment when I build loyalty to a company and that long-term relationship is that moment when I tell you that something's gone wrong, and somebody in the organization can interact with me in whatever means I prefer to communicate and can resolve my issue competently and quickly. So that's a long way to explain what I said in the beginning. They've got to be able to go faster.
Yeah, it's so true. And there is this, as we're seeing, this massive disconnect between those carriers who can properly interact with their consumers, who know how much they want to hear from their insurer and what they want to hear. And those that aren't quite there yet. Carey Anne, as our resident insurance carrier in the room, what do you think insurers should be taking from insurtechs?
Yeah, Vaughn had a really prescient comment, and I would double click on it, that insurtechs have the ability to skip all of the technological debt that incumbent insurance carriers are sitting on, which makes them much more nimble and agile to be able to build new products and develop new experiences for their customers. I think the insurtechs that have come in the past there's been a few eras of these insurtechs. They started with insurtechs that use data and technology to find operational efficiencies. Really, those companies that were taking things that were on paper and bringing them into digital formats. The second era, which I'm sure Rob can also touch on quite a bit, really focused on either using social media and marketing to ramp growth like crazy, sort of at all costs, regardless of underwriting, or find niches, companies like Metromile that identified areas where they could price more competitively using the data. I think the third era really looks like Loop, where we can use data for both reasons, sort of walk and chew gum at the same time, because our understanding of data and because the volume of information are available today that weren't available 10 years ago for those earlier eras of insurtechs, we can do both things. We can advance our technological stack to identify underwriting arbitrage opportunities, meaning find places to competitively price, and deliver on the experience of a really great mobile experience, a web experience, customer service that has chat and also phone and also you get speaking to real people fast. I mean, all of the benefits that come from not just using data for one purpose or another, but combining them is a really powerful kind of next era, I think, of insurtechs and what major insurers need to look out for, because it's the real moment that they may get left behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. And I think it's so good to make that distinction between not only insurers and insurtechs, but insurtechs and insurtechs, because we're now at this point where the sector is maturing so much that, as you say, there are multiple generations. Rob, is this consistent with what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo all of the comments that Vaughn and Carey Anne made, and I'll double click to use Carey Anne's term on a little bit of data in my response here. But I would quickly summarize this by saying major insurers can learn three things from insurtechs, and those are the three S's: strategy, speed, and scale. First, strategy. I think, unfortunately, a lot of incumbents have been around for such a long time, decades, sometimes even centuries, that they've lost their focus, quite frankly. I love hearing the foundational stories of insurers that have been around for a long time. So I previously worked at one, USA, that was founded based where I am in San Antonio, Texas, by 25 Army officers in 1922, so almost 100 years ago. There were 25 officers that couldn't get insurance anywhere else. So what did they do? They started their own insurance company. 2 weeks earlier, there was a group of farmers that had basically the same challenge that created a firm that you might have heard of called State Farm. If you go through the foundational stories of almost any incumbent insurer, you'll find a very similar story. And I actually love the parallels with companies like Loop today that are building that sense of community, that actually really know their customers and they're just kind of starting out. Unfortunately, success at most major insurers are really measured in terms of vague statements and KPIs. We want to increase revenue by a certain amount. We want to shave a couple of points off our loss ratio. Bonuses are really focused on performance for this year, and everyone's kind of focused on executing for those initiatives this year, but they're not really looking out to the future. There's not a lot of discussion about what insurance is going to look like from the 2030s, what they need to do to respond, and then kind of work their way back to figure out what do we need to do to start evolving here as we enter 2022 to be the insurer of choice in 2032. That takes a long range vision and planning. And of course, no strategy is perfect, but you really have to have that vision to start with. You have to document what your assumptions are about what that future world looks like. And you really need to revisit those assumptions every 6 months and make sure that you're on track and course correct if needed. The advantage that a lot of insurtechs have is they have a laser focus. They know exactly what they want to be, where they want to go, and they really execute right with that laser focus. That doesn't mean that they always go straight from point A to point B. There's lots of twists and turns along the way. There's the famous pivot that most startups go through. But everybody knows in that startup organization where they're headed, why they want to go there. And if there's any turns along the way, it's clearly communicated, why we're making this pivot. Unfortunately, most insurers don't have that level of clarity. And I think that's critical that organizations really seek to find that clarity and to make sure that everyone in their organizations can echo it, at least at a high level, so everyone is rowing in the same direction. The second is speed, and we've touched on this quite a bit before, but I would add that, Vaughn talked about the necessity for speed. Carey Anne talked about the advantage that startups have about not having that technical debt that's been built up. And I think about technical debt as kind of like a credit card, right? You can use that credit card, you can make investments, and it can be affordable for a time. It can make sense to, hey, I'm going to pay the minimum payment, or I'm going to pay a certain amount down every month. But over time, if you keep using that credit card and you don't make enough payments on it, over time, it becomes overwhelming to the point where, right, just keeping up with the minimum payment can be a challenge. And so it's very similar from a technical debt standpoint. And insurers, for the most part, have recognized this here in the last decade, in the 2010s. That's why we've heard so much about digital transformation journeys. We see the move to a lot of platform ecosystems like Guidewire, Duck Creek, Majesco, and many others, rather than proprietary siloed systems. The big challenge, and I know that these can be expensive and these can be exhausting investments, But quite frankly, all of that time and energy that's been spent on these digital transformation efforts are really just the tip of the iceberg. They're just keeping up with the Joneses. They're not actually providing a competitive advantage. It's what those organizations do next that I think over the next decade is really going to separate out those that are able to compete and not. We see a lot of insurtechs being enabled as partners with these platforms. And I think instead of directly kind of integrating with many of these partners, it actually makes sense to go through a Guidewire, Duck Creek, or what have you, because it's going to be insurtechs that don't exist today that 3 years from now are probably going to be a critical strategic partner of yours. And so just enabling that level of agility to know that we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's going to be the next, pandemic, cyber breach, et cetera, but we know that we need to have this agility. Well, how do we achieve it? It's going to be through the ability to quickly integrate and partner with new and old firms. And most organizations are really not set up to do that today. They're highly siloed. Yes, they may have moved platforms, but they're not enabled that level of connectivity that they need to have to be able to execute with the speed necessary. And then finally, scale. One of the things that startups, along with venture capitalists, really ask and focus on is this scalable? Does this scale? Even if we start with this product launch, right? What comes next? And certainly, I think we've all been reminded of that this week with the announcement of Lemonade that they're going beyond just renters insurance, home insurance, the move to pet and life insurance to now offer auto insurance in the U.S., which I know has been much anticipated. Particularly since their IPO, but then right in the same week they also announced the partnership with Metromile and the acquisition, right? So it was kind of like boom, boom, just two big news events, one right after the other. Well, clearly this is a strategy that they've really been building over time. They started with an underserved market, renters insurance, but they've built their company with this idea, right, of becoming more than just a top 10 renters insurance company over time. And so while it may hit the headlines this week, they've clearly been planning for this since the very inception. This is the scaling that we're talking about. They've made sure they've set up the right infrastructure, the right underwriting, the right claims, the right actuarial models, et cetera. And so I think, unfortunately, there's too many manual processes. There's too many inefficiencies at large insurers today. And quite frankly, I don't see a ton of motivation in many of the insurance that I talk to do more than tinker around the edges, right? Just a quick example, there's a lot of processes today that you could enable with AI without actually really changing the workflow, right? Decisions that underwriters are keying into a database or claims adjusters where the AI could actually be learning behind the scenes and then potentially taking over the decisioning in the future. And I've estimated that some organizations, they could eliminate up to half of their underwriters within 12 months if they were able to kind of train some AI to look at the decisions being made and ensure some additional consistency. But most organizations don't want that. They might want a 5% productivity lift, but a 50% productivity lift means they have to make some tough decisions about staffing. Do we retrain these people? Do we let these people go? What do we do? And so they'd rather not face some of those difficult challenges. Again, some of these insurtechs have no problem with that, right? Because they're just starting out, and so they're starting out lean. They're thinking about scale from day one, and so they're able to do so in a very kind of mindful and purposeful way. Whereas I think a lot of insurers have tough decisions to look at their operations and say which of these scale and which don't, and we need to make changes.
Cheers, Rob. And I really love the parallel you made there between State Farm 100 years ago and some of these insurers now, just in terms of that core sense of purpose. Because I feel like it must be a situation where the more you scale and the more you grow, decisions must become so arbitrary, and it must become so much more difficult to focus around a core set of principles and a core set of directions. I think it leads us quite nicely onto our next big question. I know you've all mentioned not only what the 2020s holds, but even what the 2030s hold. Carey Anne, what are you seeing as these next big upheavals? Obviously, we're seeing the pandemic now as this massive driving force in innovation, but what do you think will be the next ones?
Yeah, y'all do a great job of teeing me up. Thank you, Rob, for mentioning AI, because I think that has been not just a resistance, but maybe just a fear of the unknown in a highly regulated industry. I think AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning is about to really significantly transform insurance. Why? Well, I feel it on the ground level, right? We do machine learning here at Loop to try to better assess what the what the probability of someone being involved in a crash is so that we can afford people more accurate rates. We ingest millions of car crashes from public data sets. We ingest road level information, weather information, traffic volume information, behavioral data from our drivers about whether they're speeding, they're hard braking. The potential of that information to outperform the industry measures of norm today, like credit score, occupation, and education, just is simply profound. There's no reason why we should settle in at a loss ratio for auto insurance that we have. We should actually aim to reduce the actual risk and crash less with this information, which aligns the consumer's interests and the business's interests. So in my opinion, is somewhat unavoidable in terms of the future of insurance. We become more profitable the more we can manage the risk and our drivers stay safer on the road. This is going to be something that consumers start to see the benefits of from companies that are early to embrace AI. They're going to see it in their price, they're going to see it in their experience, and frankly, they're going to crash less. So there's, I think, a very big shift in consumer demand that will come from the products that AI enables and insurance companies that are not keeping pace with or building that competency and building that muscle and building that experience of what it will take to process data, to be able to ask and answer the right questions, to be able to focus, really data-driven teams on the right problems to solve. They are going to get simply left behind because that takes time to learn. It takes time to build a competency. It takes time to build an architecture around. And, insurance companies are risk averse by nature. They're unlikely to adopt new things, but we all need to commit to the reality that AI and ML isn't going anywhere. And it feels like this bizarre resistance still among incumbent insurance companies, like they're burying their head in the sand of sorts, and the reality that it is absolutely going to happen and going to give those that participate, insurtech or otherwise, really very big, very durable arbitrage on their customers.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, it's very true that we're now going from this point where AI and machine learning could be siphoned off into an innovation team somewhere in the corner of the office, but they're very much going to have to be let into the center of operations moving forward. Vaughn, what are you seeing as the next big market upheavals that will shape the industry?
Well, I think one of the big things that we saw in the pandemic was that companies had to learn to react to a new way to interact with their workforce, right? But I think workforce management itself is actually going to be one of the significant challenges or opportunities for the next wave. And workforce fluidity is accelerating. It has never been this fast. The idea that if you stood up your insurance operation in London or in Boston, you could kind of count on only having a handful of competitors nearby that your staff might be able to go to. The world has changed in that really the best talent is going to go to the best opportunity. And I think that's accelerating. I think at the end of the day, processes have to be resource neutral because the resource may change. And so where Carey Anne talks about technical debt, I think there's also operational debt in that there are a lot of organizations that have built up the ability to respond to challenges, to execute on opportunities, but they've done it through human competence and not through process competence, right? They've done it through human interaction and not through technology interaction. And the reality is that the workforce is going to change and that digital workers, and I tend to treat them as if they were entities in the workforce, right? Digital workers, RPAs, AIs are going to be picking up more tasks. They have some of the same issues. They can be cranky. They need to be managed. Somebody needs to make sure they're working, that they're delivering the work that they were supposed to do. Somebody needs to check on their results once in a while. Somebody's got to teach them a new thing from time to time. Specialty carriers are not going to have the same kind of access to massive piles of data that Carey Anne can get on traffic and auto wrecks and so forth. But you start getting into somebody who is trying to look at the possibility of a construction accident. Well, you can look at the kinds of materials that are being used, and you can scan the internet for articles about whether or not there are problems or safety issues showing up in those materials. And you can teach AIs to go screen scrape off of news sites and work back for a pattern and coalesce up data that can help make decisions. But at the end of the day, all of these bits of information are still going to generate, and I'm back to using that common phrase of exceptions. They're going to generate exceptions. And so what becomes critical in the workforce of the future, I think really as we look 5 or 10 years forward, a lot of people are terrified. They hear something like what Rob said about 50% of the underwriters won't be needed. And there may be underwriters on the call who clench up and say, oh, does that mean me? Right. But here's the reality. It's not going to create less human opportunity in the insurance industry. It's going to change the human opportunity in the insurance industry, in that the people who will survive, the companies who will survive, will elevate their people to become problem solvers, to become communicators, to become customer service agents, not in the traditional sense of I'm going to answer your call and I can look up your screen. I mean somebody who actually becomes an advocate and says, I can find a way through this challenge for you. And this human competence piece is going to be more critical than ever. And it's not necessarily just about education. It's not necessarily just that they worked at another insurance industry and know the buzzwords. It's that I'm teaching them how to competently understand what the concern is that a prospective or existing client has, and what tools I've put at their disposal to resolve those problems, and how they can leverage the tools, the problem, and the information resources, which can be overwhelming if people don't have kind of a guide through that. And I think so companies that still onboard people with this is the way we work, and they take them to a traditional cubicle and they walk them through a lot of the kind of legacy or incumbent scenarios, are going to find themselves at significant risk to the companies that onboard their people and say, I don't care where you sit. And by the way, I'm sitting in an office. I'm not negative on the office environment. But what I'm saying is that's not the important thing. The important thing is that I want you to focus on what it is that our customer wants, who we're serving in the marketplace, how we're different than them, and how you're empowered to solve problems with these data sets and tools and decisioning capabilities that I've given you. And by the way, that talent that we're looking for, they're looking for the same thing. They demand process support and agility. Somebody who's top talent does not want to go to work in a system where they're going to pull up a green screen and wait for 45 seconds for a basic answer to come up for somebody who's on the other end of a call or a Discord chat, expressing a challenge or who's in the middle of a crisis out there. So I really think a lot of it is going to be about managing the workforce. And I think this is, there are articles out there already coining the phrase, the Great Resignation. And I think there are, concerns in some areas of the marketplace that people are checking out for good. They saved up so much money and learned to live on less during COVID. But at the end of the day, I think it's really more about this trend that people have fluidity in their careers at a level that they never did. And the insurance companies that want to succeed have got to recognize that to get the best talent, they've got to be able to provide means for those talented individuals to resolve problems and feel like they're doing great work. And they've got to be able to advertise that they've got those capabilities. They've got to give them the ability to sway the course of that operation, that company. And they've got to onboard people because they're going to have a increasingly hard time finding that top talent. So they're going to have to increasingly onboard people to become that top talent and do it in short order. And I think future readiness is something to look at. One of the Forrester analysts, his name's not coming to mind at the time, but it should be pretty easy to Google, has actually got an assessment that you can download on future readiness. And it's a great thing to take a look at with employees. It's the folks who are going to be able to continue to navigate constantly changing waters and adapt to new technology. And I think that's going to be equally important to their familiarity with the specific industry's buzzwords, is their general future readiness and ability to adapt new tech. So that's it.
So many great points there. I especially love the point about so much of company culture and ultimately the output of a company being based on, from the very original point, the way in which an employee is onboarded. That might not necessarily be in the office anymore. That will be done in a very different way. Awesome. Rob, what would be your take on this? Where are you seeing like the big upheavals looming over the hill post-COVID?
Yeah, great comments from both Carey Anne and Vaughn, and echo a lot of Vaughn's comments in particular, kind of on that workforce management. I do think folks have, obviously had to work remote, but that's created a lot of companies have quickly made the transition, maybe easier than they thought, right, to be able to kind of work in that fully remote environment. But it does kind of leave questions about how do you brainstorm, how do you innovate, how do you go beyond just executing the daily tasks, right, to kind of focusing on the future. So love all the comments there. I would say there's really three things as I see here. So the first one is new processes, and again, this goes back to the shift of overnight. Hey, people are not coming into our agent or broker's office, right, and meeting with them face to face to purchase insurance anymore. We can't have physical inspections of properties or vehicles. We can't have our underwriters go, visit different agents and producers and the like. So everyone's whatever manual touches there were the mail room, right? How do we get mail? How do we get correspondence? Maybe we've been sending out physical checks, right? And we want to be able to now EFT, payments to claimants, et cetera. So companies were forced overnight to kind of really re-examine their processes. There were clear pinch points. A lot of those happened to do with some of those manual touch points, where somebody maybe had to key in information from system A into another screen into system B, right? This is 2021, and yet we still have kind of these kludgy manual processes all over the place that previously didn't have the ROI, right, to become automated or streamlined, and now are need to be, right. So I think as companies quickly kind of reevaluated processes to be able to kind of work in a fully digital world, they examine new tools. And I think this is always challenging, right? I call this the gate agent problem. So if any of you have ever been to the airport and talked to a gate agent about, maybe your seat or you're on standby or whatever the issue is, and you've noticed the system that they're working on is that green screen system that Vaughn said in most cases. And so you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're using this. Yet to that particular gate agent that's probably been using that system for 10 or 20 years, they can fly through it, right? They know all the function keys. They know how to tab to different screens. Like they're very fast and very efficient because they've been using that system for a long time. So even though it's a system that you or I couldn't use if we were asked on day one to be, start working as a gate agent, right? To them, they can fly through it. So there's going to be that natural resistance to change if you said, hey, we're going to add this, beautiful graphical user interface and drop down menus and radio buttons, and we're going to make this so easy and slick for any employee to be able to use. Yet it's super critical, right, to recognize where you're requiring employees to have a ton of tacit knowledge, as Vaughn kind of alluded to, right, where it's all in their head or it's all kind of stored away, to be able to encapsulate that knowledge digitally. And that could be the use of machine learning and other things. So I think you really need to kind of re-examine the tools, and obviously work on kind of the change management piece is just as critical as the new tools themselves, but it is critical to be able to identify where those needs and investments need to be made. And then finally, new skills. We kind of talked about the great resignation, the people that are leaving. Again, in many cases, people used to work at insurance firms for 5, 10, 20 years, even their entire careers. And I think insurance firms, quite frankly, have kind of taken for granted that that kind of lifetime employment model will always exist. Well, clearly, right, it's never been easier to see green grass everywhere else, as Vaughn alluded to, right? It's not just about who other employers are in your town or city, but really all over the world, right? We are globally connected. We all are able to work with people with special skills and knowledge and domain expertise all around the globe. And it's never been easier to find another job or to start your own company. And so I do think, it's not just managing the talent and worrying about who's leaving and walking out your door, but it's actually worrying about the people that are staying. Are your most talented, ambitious, motivated employees leaving, and are they leaving for another employer, or are they actually leaving to start their own insurtech, right? And how can you create a spirit of entrepreneurship, right, where they feel that they have that opportunity to maybe start a new business or a new company within your walls, or to be able to kind of take their creativity, their talents, and be able to bring all of that to bear without having to work 5 years to make it to a senior role and 10 years to make it to a manager, right? With the hopes that maybe one day they'll be an executive in 25 years. Those days are over. And so you really need to identify not just, career ladders, but full career pathways, the ability to rotate into different jobs, to experience different roles, completely rethink about your workforce, and then think about how they're going to interact with machines. Because almost no matter what role they have, there's going to be some kind of human machine interface that they have to deal with, and they're going to have to be very, very comfortable working in that type of environment, not intimidated by it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. I think it leads us quite nicely into the next question. I think it's one where I think we should all go quite specific about, maybe if we're not naming companies necessarily, let's start calling out some business models. But actually, I'll stay with you, Rob, first. Do you think insurers on the whole are ready to face challenges of the 2020s? And as a sort of nuance on that, which models do you think will work? Which models do you think won't work?
So I think it's early days to say, but I would say I feel like some traditional insurers that have really embraced this new model, that seek out partnerships with insurtechs, that are asking themselves, right, what is insurance going to look like in the 2030s? How do we need to prepare for that? That have strategy teams, that have dedicated innovation teams, and that really, that those teams are integrated with their operations, not just kind of in a glorified procurement team. Ones that are limited partners with venture capitalists, ones that are maybe even starting kind of their own accelerator, right, to identify some of the most talented startups and kind of encourage those. I do feel like, and they're willing to sacrifice, right, today's profit for kind of that building their business and reinventing themselves for tomorrow. I think you're going to really see them kind of pull ahead. I do say that the majority of insurers are still stuck in the past. I think they think insurtech is a fad. I call this the this too shall pass phenomenon. It was quite interesting, at the recent Insurtech Connect. Some of the buzz came from Evan Greenberg, the CEO of Chubb, that really kind of, I guess, criticizing all of the hype around insurtech. And so that got reactions on both sides, as you might imagine. And while, yes, hype and is quite frankly a little bit part of insurtech, and there's reasons for that, right? There's startups that want to get noticed. There's VCs that want to get paid and get return on investment. Clearly, we've had success stories. Clearly, this is not going away. So while individual companies may rise and fall and fail, or may have an exit that's successful or not successful, I think the overall general push for investment in this space is not going away. And we've seen from the early success of many companies, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. We are setting a record every quarter for investment in insurtech. And quite frankly, one of the measures that I look for is the industry expense ratio. I talk in my book that it's really been essentially just under 30% for the past decade. So as revenues, as premiums go up, expenses have gone up at the same rate, right? Which is why that expense ratio has really been a flat line. That's not sustainable. We need to be driving that down. We need to be becoming more efficient as an industry. And so it's until you start seeing that expense ratio getting down into the 20s, the teens, dare I say, high single digits. I don't think it'll ever be low single digits like the 3% on exchange fees that you have swiping credit cards. But it needs to get more efficient. And to the extent that it's not, you're going to have folks like Carey Anne that are out there that see opportunities. Even though there's hundreds of auto insurers out there, right? There's still pockets of opportunity. And over time, I fully expect companies like Loop and many others to become successful. And it'll probably be, unfortunately, at that point where they do have large success, that insurers will wake up and realize they need to change their ways. You can't wait till you get to that point. You need to address these challenges now.
That's an exciting point to reach. Vaughn, what's your take on this? Do you think, do you see a similar picture? Do you think insurers are ready to face the challenges of the 2020s? Oh, sorry, Vaughn, I think we've got you on mute there. There we go.
Yeah, my fault. My apology. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to look at this, right? I mean, certainly some of the big insurers have got the capitalization necessary, the relationships with reinsurers that are necessary to keep expanding their markets into big opportunities. So there is an incumbent advantage, there is an established advantage out there. But I don't really subscribe to that creating the sort of safety that some of the folks in that industry in those positions may feel they have. Uh, there's the old book, right? The fast eat the slow, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think one of the contrasts, and again, I won't use names, but I will give you some specifics. We worked with a startup that was being spun out of one of the world's largest insurance companies. They wanted to run a specialty line, and if I explained the line, everybody'd probably figure out who they were. But they knew they needed to spin them out because it wasn't possible for them to be competitive in this new area if they kind of lived under the legacy rules of the mothership. And so when they spun this organization out, we talked to a technical consultant they hired. They went from initial questions and evaluation to a purchase order to buy our software in about 15 days. And from that day to the day that they went live on it, and by the way, I'd say 3/4 of this was probably them spending time deciding how they would want to do it. 53 days later, they were live. And they were live on something that was actually giving them the ability to do business. They built it themselves. They had a key business analyst who understood a lot about the way their business operated, who got our software, who got the capabilities of a no-code platform, and very, very quickly tailored it to manage work at scale to make sure that things that were standard cases were getting moved to the standard queue, specialty cases were getting moved to specialty queues, things were going through appropriate approval processes. They stood it up extremely quickly. And, they've continued over time to integrate into other systems, to have it leverage digital workers alongside of human workers. But this contrast of 53 days from decision to live just jumped out at me when a handful of months later, we realized it had taken us about 60 days to get a meeting with one of our incumbent carriers about getting them updated to a newer version, right? So the point is the adoption curve for technology for a small company. Now, when small companies become big companies, they have some of the same weight. They have to be careful. They have to make sure that they don't introduce new risks when they're making rapid decisions. And it's a little harder for the super competent people that started a company to control 1,000-person organization than it is 100 or a 10-person organization. But nonetheless, the assumptions that are made by the incumbent carriers who have the benefit of these heavy backing of capital are sometimes that we must continue to move all of these systems and all of these processes and all of these people we've got forward at this sort of gingerly pace. And when somebody's under the pressure of trying to figure out how to get into business very quickly and get some revenue coming in the doors, they actually tend to make much leaner decisions. And I think, I would actually predict that some of the large carriers are going to find themselves being swallowed up by some of the insurtechs. I think insurtechs have learned how to raise capital for ventures, for crazy risk-taking things that, by the way, are outside of the mindset. And again, I'm not negative. I've got some wonderful insurance customers, but they're in the business of insuring other people's risks, and they're having a hard time sometimes taking the risks that they need to internally and learning how to move forward very quickly. And I think in the absence of that risk taking, some of them are going to find themselves with these higher cost structures, with a challenge competing, with less ability to interact quickly with their customers, really, really seeing themselves at risk. And I don't think an insurtech is going to have to get up to say, hey, I'm the same size as State Farm. In order to be able to acquire them, they're going to have to show that I could radically cut down the size of State Farm and still service all of their policies and keep that net written premium coming in the front door. And that's a radical and kind of, maybe outlandish thing to say, but I think some of the folks that have got 10 to 30 people hanging around a startup office right now and are learning how to adapt technology very quickly inside of the next decade are going to acquire companies that are used to hiring more people on a Wednesday afternoon than the companies who will be acquiring them have in their entire office. And And I think, so there are certainly companies that are ready to face the challenges of the 2020s. They are the companies that are really embracing digital transformation and are getting out of the old mindset of I have to hire specialty people to move us forward in terms of process and technology. The world is changing. Kids are coming out of college with such an adaptation towards technology that if you want to see a much higher adoption curve in the deployment of technology, you don't tell people what you want them to begin using because you're going to roll it out. You engage them in building it, and that mentality that exists in the startups, I don't see, but probably 10 or 15% of the incumbent carriers beginning to take that mentality on. I think the ones who do will have the advantage of capital and the advantage of thought. I think the ones who don't will have the advantage of capital until it leaks out, and there will be people very happy to capitalize fast movers to eat the slow, and that's what I think is going to happen. So I think I'm giving you a mixed response on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. In the interest of time and just making sure we can sort of get this all, everything we want to talk about through within the hour, I'm just going to hold Carey Anne for a second, and I'm going to combine this question to you with one of our Q&As.
Sure.
Just before I do that, I thought I'd turn everyone's attention to something we haven't done for a while, which is a conference in person. I know that there's been a bit of mention of a previous conference that shall not be named in Las Vegas, but I think it's got everyone thinking once again that actually we could all meet in person at some point. These digital events are great. We're going to keep doing them, but we'd also love to see you in person. So I thought I'd just give a little introduction to Insurtech Insights Europe. It's coming around quite soon now, only 4 or 5 months away. So that's in March next year. At an unprecedentedly big venue in East London. We're very excited to see you all there. Some really big questions are going to be posed there, not only about the 2020s, but about the 2030s and beyond. I know that since we first conceived of this conference, which would have been in March 2020, just 2 days after the imposition of the UK lockdown, the world has changed a lot. There were no questions about post-pandemic. It was very much pre-pandemic at that point. And there are huge, huge questions and themes that have emerged. No one was talking about embedded insurance back then. There were lots of themes that had never been thought about, or just a glimmer in the eye. So we'd love to see as many of you there as possible. We'll be including loads of details about how to get involved. If you'd like to have sort of a chat with us about getting more closely involved, feel free to drop a comment below or get in touch with anyone from the team. But yeah, we're really excited to see you there. There'll be something for everyone, and there are so many ways of getting involved. On that note, though, I think it's time to get into our Q&A section. So I promised Carey Anne here that we'd I sort of hold her on the last question. So this is obviously, I think we can do a sort of combination here of what the future holds for business models, but also a bit about Francesca's question. So I think this is sort of an adaptation on what we've been talking about before. But Francesca's asking as well, are we likely to see a more fragmented insurance market, or one where there are new incumbents? What would be your take on this, Carey Anne?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Francesca. And I just wanted to also take the opportunity to double click on Vaughn's point. You came ready. I feel like I needed to have at least 2 cups of coffee to hear that. It was a really powerful statement, and I think the right call. And an important thing to start to signal to the market that it's not insurtechs that are slowly going to make small bites towards becoming a big carrier. I also believe that there will be an acquisition market, a lot of M&A happening in the next 10 years as well. And to double on that, I think with data becomes the opportunity to price books of business more accurately. So some really affordable acquisitions as well. And we saw that not just as recently as yesterday. So I think you're right, Vaughn. And if folks aren't actually saying it yet, you will be credited with being the first. Thank you for being so bold and thoughtful. So to Francesca's question, whether it will become more fragmented or not, I think I would reference Vaughn's answer here in saying that there will be a period of disruption where we have new incumbents come into or non-incumbents come into the marketplace. You'll see a few different ideas emerge about how to win in the space. Certainly those that can become capitalized and who can warrant reinsurance as well. We haven't really talked about reinsurance, but I do believe that that's an important key stakeholder in this space to open up more capacity for insurtechs that have data and can prove that their math works. But that it will be a fragmented market, but only for a period of time. Eventually, we will see new winners emerge, new philosophies of insurance emerge. And my take on those that will win, we focused a lot on technology. So I don't want to double click on that, but I think that there's another point to be made here about what are the key challenges that insurance incumbents are facing. What we think about at Loop is that the thing that we're really fixing is trust with a consumer. Data is a way and technology is a way to rebuild trust. But what we feel like is like when we buy insurance is that we're buying insurance from like a used car salesman that's trying to hustle us off a lot. That feeling of how the consumer feels leaves the door open, because ultimately you can have all of the data and the technology in the world, but if you're not building for a consumer and you're not solving a consumer pain point, you don't have a business. The consumer pain point in this case is massive, and folks that are investing in building relationships with customers, going into social channels and having conversations in spaces about financial literacy and wealth building are really important to this next generation of folks who are making decisions about what insurance they will buy based on the experience and the values of the businesses that they're buying from. And while many incumbent insurance carriers have more, resources spent on advertising today than we did raise in our Series A, and we raised a $21 million Series A, so I feel very well capitalized. Progressive can spend that in a month in advertising, if not less time. But it really, you can't build a long-term, sustainable, durable brand if customers just kind of like you and like you occasionally and will look at other options the minute they become available. You really have to invest in building love and building for your customer a product that they really want to get behind, that they want to tell their friends and family about, that they want to use, that they feel like they're getting value from. So I think the next era of insurtechs is really going to take what is not only a technologically archaic industry, but also one that has lost their way with consumers and decide that there's a better way to do things. And I don't think it'll be fragmented for long the minute you succeed at both.
Awesome. Thanks, Carey Anne. And as we hurtle towards the end of this hour, I think we only have time for one more Q&A question. There's one here which I think is just perfectly suited to what Vaughn's been talking about before, so I'll throw this one in. This is Josh asking, how do you find the right people in your organization to implement this kind of major change?
I had to remember to go turn the mute off. Listen, I think that's a great question. What we have found is that it isn't something you define by title. It's something you define by a systemic thinking pattern. Someone who listen, there's an old adage that if you want to find great leaders, find people who are already leading, right? So if you want to grow leaders from within your organization, you look for people who are already solving problems for others, who are already coaching and mentoring others. The same thing comes from this perspective. If you want to try to find people who are going to help you achieve digital transformation, look for the people who are already doing it in the microcosms that they have power over. When you find the gal in a team that everybody goes to figure out how to get an Excel chart to work for them, that you've already found the person who has that technical creativity. When you find the person in an organization who other people ask, how do we do this? And they're explaining it to them. If you cross those two things, if you take somebody who has SME over what your business operations are, and if you blend that with someone who has that sort of technical creativity, then you've got somebody who's actually ready to achieve digital transformation and to move an organization forward from the embracing of technology, from the empowering of others to use that technology, from the adoption of technology, which are all, really critical things. You can't have a successful technology project unless people use it. And finding those sorts of champions and bringing them in at the very least into the design process, into the build discussions, and at the very best, you're looking for tools that empower them to actually modify the way the business runs, and you're looking to give them the tools necessary. If you're in a large environment and change is very risky, then you've got to put those processes in place, but you've got to make those processes work for people who are like that. And if you're in a small environment where rapid change is a benefit and you can accept small amounts of risk, then you let that person move as quickly as possible. And I think, like I said, they're often within your ranks already. Sometimes they're a classically trained business analyst, but oftentimes it's just that savvy Susie who's over in the corner that seems to have a line at her door or at the edge of her cube with people looking for help with things. Those are the hidden resources. We've got in fact, a webinar on that. Maybe I'm getting teed up for that. I should answer. We've got a recorded webinar on our website about finding the hidden talent within your organization to help with these sorts of efforts. And I'd definitely encourage anybody who's interested in figuring out how to identify and support these people to go take a look at that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was half expecting a link to come up on the screen there. It was a very slick segue. I think so. We've got the key takeaways now. Again, in the interest of time, I think these we'll just keep these quite succinct. But I guess from the panelists here, it'd be great to hear if you could just give one takeaway to your audience here. What would that be? Rob, what would be your key takeaway from what we've discussed today?
Yeah, my key takeaway is insurtechs are here to stay. And so you need to have a serious conversation within your organization about, how do we partner with them? How do we emulate some of what's making them successful? And just really look at it as an opportunity for learn, just as you may have an opportunity to learn from, younger folks, whether they be Gen Z, whether they be, your children or whatnot, that are technology natives, right? That kind of live in almost a different world than some of us that have been at traditional incumbents for a long time. I think it's just critical to not be arrogant, to not be aloof, to not think that this will pass, but to see it as an opportunity to learn and get better.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Carey Anne, what would be your key takeaway?
Buckle up, get ready, because what an exciting time to be in this industry, for an industry that has cast itself to be boring and not sexy. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, I think I'm lobbying constantly to change the tagline of Insurtech Insights to make insurance sexy again, if it ever was. Finally, Vaughn, what would be your key takeaway?
Well, a quick point, since the logo is kind of washed out up there, the company name is HighGear. It kind of looks like a Star Trek logo. That wasn't by design, but that's the reason we've never made our company shirts red. Nobody would be willing to wear them. Hey, so I would say there's a few things. Number one, key takeaway, buy Rob's book. It's excellent. He offers great insights on the future of the insurance industry. Number two, if you own a car, you should probably go look at Carey Anne's company and see if she can provide insurance for you. Number three, if you've got processes that you wish people in your organization could improve, take a look at HighGear. And finally, really salient to the talk, focus on the people, because they're the ones who are going to help you go fast. And going fast is the most important key takeaway that I could give, especially to the incumbent carriers. You're in a race for your lives, whether you know it or not. There are people like Carey Anne who are out there gunning for you, and I'm going to bet on her acquiring at least one of you at some point. But there's plenty of ways for you to leverage that capital and advance the built-in advantage you've got as an incumbent. But you must learn to move fast, and it really is about the people.
Awesome. Thank you. Some great key takeaways. Go faster. Buy Rob's book. Fear Carey Anne. All great, great piece of advice there. I think that's all we've got time for today. I think I'll just refer people quickly to our next week's two webinars. We've got one on health insurance disruption, specifically in the US market, with some great speakers from Swiss Re and Spot. And then for our global webinar, we've got one on embedded insurance with people from Lovis and Cover. So some really great discussions coming up next week. I think more importantly, though, I'd like to thank the three of you so much for your insights today. So thank you, Rob, Carey Anne, and Vaughn. I'm sure the audience would be clapping if they could. I'm sure they're actually clapping in their homes, but we just can't hear it. But thank you so much. I hope you all have a brilliant rest of the day. And yeah, really hope to see you on our content again soon. And I hope everyone tunes in at some point once again. But that's all from us. Thank you, and see you next week.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.